Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of March of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start of course with Bakhmut, because there are a lot of very interesting updates are coming from this town. So let's go in this town. As you can see, the Western sources map is not updated, but when talking about the Russian sources map, they're saying that this evening we start receiving updates that the Russians started storming operation of the town hall. That this is the town hall of Bakhmut. So as you can see, this town hall is located not in the geographical center of Bakhmut. This town hall is located a little bit to the south in the central part of Bakhmut, this one, and the Russians started storming this area. And this very important area and this very important piece of news, and I'll try to explain to you why. Now let's return back to the Western sources map, and today while the live stream we discussed the problems and we try to split Bakhmut into many pieces. And the biggest, and I'll repeat it one more time, the biggest problem when you're trying to storm any town is the streets, and the biggest problem is wide streets. So as you can see, there are a lot of small local streets and there are a lot of wide streets. And when talking about the central part, there are at least few streets. Shirokaya street, this one. Let's update. So this is the first wide street, and the second one is Mariupolskaya street. So this is Mariupolskaya street. This is Independence street, and this is road M32. And when talking about any town, any settlement that the Russians were storming, wide streets is the big headache for the Russians. It takes time and it takes a lot of resources to cross this area, to cross streets, because when talking about wide streets, it's the best position for the enemy party, let's say somewhere in this area, to establish a lot of sniper position, and just while crossing the wide street you can lose a lot of soldiers from your side. So it's always very difficult to cross wide streets. And of course, when talking about the western part of Bakhmut, there is a Kherson street, and as you can see, the Russians made a lot of attempts to cross this area, but they still haven't done this. And the main reason of that, of course, is the residential area that located near the airplane square, near this area, and from this position the Ukrainians are able to control the entire Kherson street. And of course, when the Russians are trying to cross, it's the best and the tasty piece of cake for the Ukrainian snipers. And the same situation about the south. And by today, the Russians were reported that they managed by this morning to establish control over entire area, over these two blocks on the south, like Budyunovka and Sabachaevka. Furthermore, the Russians established control over the eastern part of Independence streets till the Bazarnaya street. They established control over Marketplace. So that was the area under Russian control by this morning. And later today, the Russians start reporting that they started some kind of storming process of the town hall that located in this area. One more time, this is this town hall. This is Mariupolskaya wide street, this is the Shirokaya street, and as you can see, the Russians managed to cross these wide streets and to enter and establish the bridgehead, let's say in this southern part of the central part of Bakhmut, inside this small square. As you can see, and to tell the truth, that was the most fortified Ukrainian position, like inside a square surrounded by the wide streets, and there are residential area in central part with the high buildings, and the Ukrainians and the Russians managed to cross these wide streets and to enter the southern part of the central part of Bakhmut from the south. Furthermore, the Russians tried to develop their offensive operation from the north as well, and there are two questions what the Russians are planning to do. They want to push the Ukrainians from this area, or they want to establish a local and small encirclement in this area. If they want to encircle, of course, we understand that for these purposes the Russians need to cut this railroad and to establish control over two bridges that we can find here. There is the first bridge right in front of the railroad station, and I believe that soon we're going to see the heaviest clashes in the vicinity of this railroad station, because railroad stations is always some kind of Gary's fortress that Ukrainians were able to hold for a very long time. in every single battle since the beginning of the special operation, and another bridge from this onto the south from the railroad station. So if the Russians want to encircle these forces, then they need to continue their movements along the railroad to the north from the south, and the same situation along the railroad from the Azom steel plant to the south as well. And by these attacks, they can encircle the Ukrainian forces in this area. Highly unlikely the Russians are able to do this because there are a lot of Ukrainians. Furthermore, for example, if when talking about the numbers, today we received the fresh numbers from the Mark Milley, the head of General Staff of United States of America. Today he told us that there are around 36,000 Wagnerians who are currently storming Bakhmut. And he classified this number, saying that there are around 6,000 soldiers of professional Wagnerians, very professional guys who passed Syria war and who passed the war in Africa and many other countries. And there are like 6,000 soldiers of this type, and 30,000 is the recently recruited soldiers and the prisoners as well. So you see that there is a very powerful base in Wagner army, 6,000 soldiers and 30,000 like regular infantry, regular stormtroopers, and it's a very powerful army. And furthermore, don't forget that Prigozhin a few days ago reported that his army just stormed Bakhmut. And when talking about the flanks, then that means that Kurdyumovka, Zyryanovka, this territory on the south, and Solidar, Krasnaya Gora, Zalesnyanska to the north, these two bridgeheads are under protection of the regular Russian army. I'm not sure about the number of regular Russian army that are deployed in this area, but one more time I'll remind you that from the Ukrainian side there are around 80,000 soldiers who currently are deployed in the vicinity of Chasov Yar and along the road between Slavyansk and Bakhmut. We expect the upcoming counteroffensive operation, but the situation is critical for the Ukrainians. During this week they made a few attempts to counteroffensive operation along the road MO3. They were using small tactical groups, and they haven't used the broad frontline attacks, just the small tactical groups. And maybe you saw a video confirmation or photo when the Ukrainians, while trying to pass by this MO3 road between this inside this forest, were spotted and discovered by the Russian artillery, and as a result of Russian artillery attack, the entire convoy of Ukrainian forces were destroyed in the vicinity of this forest. It was a very terrible video. Furthermore, the Russians continue their storming operation and clashes in the vicinity of Orekhovo-Vasilievka, and furthermore the Russians activated a little bit from Zalesnyansk in direction of Bandarne, trying to establish control over this salient and to short the front line and to establish the front line from Bandarne to Minkovka, but as you can see, without progress. And furthermore, as we understand, according to the words of Prigozhin, now this territory is under responsibility of Russian army, so maybe they're start doing some kind of recon in combat, trying to understand and analyze and to find weak position in Ukrainians defense. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 310 soldiers, 20 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks and 2 artillery systems Tab, and these losses doesn't include the number from Bakhmut, because Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation haven't included the results of clashes on this front line during the previous 24 hours. I believe that these losses are coming from Avdiivka front line. Now let's return back to the Russian sources map, and we see that the Russians have updated their gray zone, and today they were added a few icons in the south of Tonenka and Severnaya, saying that, confirming that Ukrainians, there was a video, well, if we take a look at this icon, there is a video and showing a video and a photo confirmation showing that Ukrainians were attacking this forest line using their own artillery systems. So that means that as a result of clashes during the previous days, the Russians managed to establish control over this forest line right in front of settlements Tonenka and Severna. Let's return back to this map. So according to information we have from the Ukrainian sources, the Russians controls something. Currently they control something like this on the south of these two settlements, and as you can see there are no more forest lines before these two towns, Severna and Tonenka. I don't know what the Russians are doing right now and how are they going to solve this puzzle, how are they going to attack these two towns, because as you can see when talking about this local battle, we see that the settlements are very far from Severna and Tonenka, and this area is under complete drone control from the Ukrainian side. If we take a look at Russian deployment map, we're gonna see that, for example, the Ukrainians redeployed here their very interesting brigade by the name of Birds of Madyar. We discussed this person a lot of time during the previous videos. This is one of the most powerful Ukrainian drone brigade or battalion that uses drones to do intelligence, to attack the Russians with bombs and so on. This brigade was redeployed. Yes, these forces were redeployed from Solidar and Donetsk as soon as Solidar fell. These forces are under control of the person who was the last one who told that Solidar fell during the January and so on. So now there are very powerful drone forces in Avdiivka, and this is a very big pain in with Russian plans, because they deal a lot of damage to the Russians. From the other side, the Russians have their own anti-drone weapon, but anyway we see that there are no progress for the last few days. And the thing is that, as we discussed in the previous videos, the Russians continue accumulation and collecting their forces, they continue their regrouping, and they're trying to analyze and understand what they're going to do next. Furthermore, as you can see, there are still we have a lot of questions about Kupyansk, and because not every map shows that this town is under Russian control, at least the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine still include this town Kupyansk into their reports, saying that this or that attack was repulsed in the vicinity of this town. So we can say that maybe there are still some area in the ground that Ukrainians controls in the vicinity of this town, where they are able to send the reserves and reinforcements to fight with the Russians. But anyway, we see that the Russians stopped. Furthermore, the Russians don't confirm the information that they managed to pass the railroad and to enter Novokalinova. But for example, the Western sources map shows this piece of information, but without any video or photo confirmation. So we'll see what is going to be next in this front line. The Russians are saying that they managed to penetrate and develop some progress in the vicinity of Marinka, and the most important thing is that there is a Y Street Druzhba. Also, as you can see, another problem. As usually, Y Street means a lot of problem for Russian stormtroopers, and if the Western source map has been updated, showing that now the Russians controlled everything on the east side of this Druzhba Avenue, these wide streets, and furthermore the Russians control the south part as well. But anyway, the Russians continue pushing in Marinka, and the Ukrainians are stepping back, but it's not but anyways, we can see the Russians still are not able to establish 100% control very soon and very fast. So I believe it will take another few weeks or even months before the Russians are able to establish 100% control over this town. Now let's move to the south and let's discuss South Donetsk area. As you can see, there are no icons at all during the previous 24 hours, just the regular report from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. They're saying that as a result of artillery duels and air forces attacks, the Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, and 1 artillery system D-20. So as you can see, the losses are not very high, just the interesting piece of information that Ukrainians lost a tank. There is some map updates on the map showing the position of the Ukrainians in the vicinity of Orekhov, but anyway, there are no changes on the ground. When talking about Kherson area, as you can see, there are very heavy artillery duels in this area. The Russians reported that as a result of artillery duels, the Russians managed to destroy 1 one M777 howitzer, another howitzer Akatsiya. They managed to attack and destroy 4 headquarters all over the front lines, including one headquarter on the Kherson front line. As a result of those artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems, as we discussed, Avdiivka and M777 howitzer Akatsiya. Now let's go to the Kupyansk and Lyman front line. There are still very heavy artillery duels, but without any changes on the ground. During the previous weeks, the Russians made few attempts to storm Avdiivka, but they stopped at some point. The same situation on the south. The Russians they almost got the outskirts of Tarskoye, but for some reason they took a decision not to enter this settlement, and the same situation all over the single town along Zherebets river. As a result of clashes on Lyman front line, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 1 howitzer Akatsiya, but as you can see, without any changes on the ground. The same situation on Kupyansk front line, no changes, just artillery duels. The Ukrainians sent few commandos groups in the vicinity of Mosykovka in direction of Lyman, Первая, Grobivka, Dvorechna. The Russians discovered those commandos groups, and with the fire of artillery they managed to destroy up to 20 soldiers from the Ukrainian side. As a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 35 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 1 anti-tank gun MT-12. Furthermore, today we got very interesting updates from north of Ukraine, from Chernigov region. If you remember, during these months, the Ukrainians have already crossed the border with Russia in Bryansk front, on the Bryansk region, and sent their commandos. As a result of the previous crossing of the border, the Ukrainians managed to establish control over 2 settlements, Sushany and Lubechina, along the border with the Russian Federation. As a result of that attack, the Ukrainians managed to make some kind of photo. They reported that was Free Russian Regiment forces, Free Russian Corps who crossed the border. They made a lot of videos, published those videos, and made some kind of, sent a message to the Russian authorities. As a result of that operation, 1 civilian was killed and 1 children was wounded, but the child recovered after. And today the Ukrainians made another attempt to cross the border. They sent 2 groups of commandos, 2 cars. They crossed the border and they was running very fast, but the Russians started artillery fire, and as a result of that, 1 car was destroyed and the second one returned back on the Ukrainian territory. As a result of that attack, 8 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. Furthermore, there is a lot of the governor of Bryansk, so there are a lot of issues, a lot of problems with the local Bryansk authorities, and there is a lot of scandals with them. The Russians are saying that they have captured some vice president of the head of Bryansk region and so on. A lot of people who had very high position in the authorities were captured by the Russian financial forces, financial police, and now there is some kind of investigation. And the main question the Russian military authorities has is that a lot of money during the previous year were invested into defense line between Ukraine and Russian Federation, and currently we see that there was 2 attempts to cross the border during the months, and all of them were successful. Yes, we see that as a result of all those attempts, the Ukrainians lost soldiers, but anyway, they can do this. That means that something wrong happened with the investments that the Russian authority made to increase the power of these defense lines. So there are a lot of things, and we're going to see, I believe soon we're going to understand the results of that investigation, and so on. More and more video and photo confirmation are coming from the territory of Ukraine. For example, these days we saw the France tanks. Now we see the video and photo of Challengers on the territory of Ukraine. So a lot of forces, a lot of Western weapon has been already deployed on the territory of Ukraine. And furthermore, some sources are saying that Ukrainians, we know that Zelensky took a decision not to step back from Bakhmut. He said that if Ukrainians loses Bakhmut, then Putin will be able to, and Russia will be able to use this situation to increase the pressure on the Western countries and to reduce the support of Ukrainians, to increase the pressure on the citizens of United States before the upcoming elections and so on. So Zelensky is afraid of losing Bakhmut. He understands that situation is very critical, and he understands that Ukraine, and he told us, and he confirmed this information, that Ukrainians are no longer can't survive and can't stand against Russia without Western support. So that's why he take a decision not to step back from Bakhmut. And now we receive a lot of piece of information where Zelensky were asking permission from Western countries to use Western weapons like Leopard, Challengers, and all type of armored vehicles, strikers, and so on, in the battle for Bakhmut. I don't know why did he take such a decision. Maybe he doesn't have his own old Soviet weapon, Soviet armored vehicles, very difficult to understand. But anyway, I believe that maybe even this week or the next week we are going to see the first clashes and the first destroyed Western tanks and Western armored vehicles. Anyway, we are going to see them. So, and that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.